interpretations.
Yes.
Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks, where we meet with the top thought leaders and strategists in emerging technologies, digital assets, regulatory landscape, and capital markets. I'm your host, Jill Malandrino, and joining me on the desk at the Nasdaq market site is Dr. Merav Ozair, global leading emerging technologies expert, Sunand Raghupathi, co-founder of 7 Seas Capital, Fadi Chehadé, founder and managing partner at Ethos Capital, and Jason Rozovsky, head of legal at Interop Labs. We're here to discuss AI regulation and governance structure for emerging technologies. It is great to have everyone with us. And before we get into the nitty-gritty of governance and regulation, Merav, let's talk about some of the latest trends that you're watching in DeFi.
Okay, I think that, again, going back to AI, now I think the integration of AI, it's already happening. We see like an example like Numerai. They are using AI for predictions, for example. It's a crowdsourcing, but it's using that. Or you have finance, Harvest Finance. That's a protocol that already using AI to optimize the yields. Of course, protocols. So it has been used, and it's even going to be used even more. So the integration of DeFi to enhance it and make it more user-friendly and engaging the AI. Now even with Gen AI, it's going to be even more. We're going to see it even more than what we're seeing right now.
Right. So, Sun, let's look at it from a market structure, financial services perspective, and how DeFi is impacting perhaps central banks and how we're thinking about monetary policy.
Yeah, I think that you see this kind of reactionary nature in DeFi market structure to traditional finance market structure. Everything in DeFi, because it's such a small market today, is downstream of traditional finance. So you'll see things like rate increases make DeFi less appealing to a lot of market actors. Capital flows out. Rate decreases, now all of a sudden DeFi is more appealing. And so today we see this structure where you almost don't need to look at what's happening in DeFi to be able to predict what's happening in DeFi. You can look at the broader economy and things like interest rates. But yeah, I think I'm also very bullish on DeFi. I think that as it grows, we will start to see DeFi dissociate. And as we see a convergence of traditional finance and DeFi, things become tokenized, AI agents play a role here, we will start to see a dissociation in DeFi have its own unique market.
I think that tokenization will be the catalyst.
Yeah.
And to DeFi, it is related. You can tokenize, in a traditional sense, and you can tokenize it more in a DeFi sense. But the tokenization, if it kind of pull the trigger, because everyone is talking about that. 30 trillion market in 10 years, 10 trillion in 5 years. Okay, great. But it has to happen before we get to the 30 trillion. But I think the tokenization will be the trigger to then people will figure out, oh, there's also this and this and this and this, because now it's hard for the people to understand. The ones who get it, it's either people like us or people like Larry Fink.
Right. So let's look at this from a different perspective, Fadi, and tell us about Ethos Capital and your approach here, because it's not necessarily just about the finance part of it. There's also social impact, and one thing we talk about in this particular conversation is transparency and accountability.
It's extremely important to keep in mind that in all of these models, in DeFi and in AI, the transparency of where data comes from is going to become central to people trusting these systems. And so I believe that whilst Web3 was about essentially the distributed web, Web 4 and 5 will be about the authenticated web, about data that is authenticated, that we know where it comes from. So at Ethos, we focus immensely on that in the companies we invest in. Are they tracking the data provenance, and how are they doing it? Using AI and Web3 and other technologies, but consumers and governments are expecting all of us innovators to actually invest in the authenticity of data and its provenance.
Right, and Jason, part of that is the progress that has been made with interoperability and the structure improving to foster these technologies and the advancement of them.
Yeah, and I think from the Interop Lab side, we're helping build this network called the XR network, and the XR network is essentially a cross-chain programmable network. It's decentralized, right? It has its own set of validators that operate it, and what we're seeing is essentially both on the public permissionless side and the private permission side, views towards interoperability. So I think, somebody mentioned obviously around the institutional side, right? We recently did a paper with Citi, Deutsche Bank, MasterCard, and Northern Trust, where essentially these institutions are realizing that all the benefits that they're looking for from blockchain are actually based on interoperability.
Yeah.
And what do I mean by that, right? Somewhere in the mid-2010s, banks were looking at blockchain, right? And they said to themselves, we are trying to avoid the same issues that we've had over the course of 40, 50 years of tech infrastructure built one layer on top of the other, on top of the other, and obviously getting into essentially transactions where they're all reconciling the same exact data, right? But what came with those infrastructures that they built was essentially vendor lock-in, right? They're trying to avoid the same thing here, right? If you're going to have all of these different networks pop up, and each one is going to have their own ecosystem with their own trapped assets, you're essentially recreating the old world, right? So from the institutional side, I think we're seeing a lot of interest on that front, right? The other part of the equation is obviously on the public and permissionless side, right? And again, we're really could probably put that into two buckets. We're seeing the, kind of apps and DeFi protocols that were built for one chain that are now kind of migrating over to interoperability. Uniswap is an example of one, Lido is another one. And I think the second bucket are the chains that are actually building, or I'm sorry, the applications are actually building for interoperability from the beginning. And one example is Sommelier, and I know Sunand here is a strategist, or his company is a strategist for Sommelier and for kind of achieving cross-chain interoperability on that front. So I think, what's interesting and exciting is we're seeing it kind of on all fronts and people realizing the benefits.
Right, and Merav, at the end of the day, it comes down to improving user experience. So you don't really care necessarily how it gets from point A to point B as long as it's transparent, safe, and it does its job.
Exactly, and interoperability, I think, come back to that because it's all about transparency. And being able, to move from one to other without the silos, because jumping, hoops, from one silo to another, it just, it deters, the user, for engagement. If I always have to, jump from one hoop to another hoop and then understand how to use this app in order to engage with this app and to this app, it's frustrating. And also time consuming, and we all think about time, and not to mention that accuracy, things can go wrong, as you go jumping between all these silos. Security. So exactly.
I would just add, there's different ways that you can do interoperability, right? So one of the kind of key features that we focus on was a hub and spoke model, right? The idea being that you connect once, and then now you're connected to all the connected chains, right? Rather than creating these bilateral connections, right? And then all of a sudden you have that ease, right? Because you can instantly connect, and now you're connected to kind of all the chains at once.
And that connects to accountability and transparency and all the other, and also security if you think about it. Yeah. Because it's hard, to figure out the security when you don't know where things are happening. But if it's all connected, then it's easier.
But does this, in your opinion, create more vulnerability because you come in through one place to go everywhere?
So I think if you look at it as layers, right? There's kind of the protocol layer, right? And I think that's the end goal for the space, right? It's we want to see immutable, verifiable data that's you can transact on a transparent basis, right? And that's kind of what the benefits of blockchain are, right? Yeah. And then there's the smart contract layer, right? Exactly. And that's the programmable layer, right? So again, from our perspective, the way this network had been built to begin with, you could actually program in programmability cross-chain, right? And so the idea being exactly that, right? It's that you have very kind of verifiable data that's going at the protocol layer, but then at the smart contract layer, right? That's where you're building your dApps.
And then you can add the AI to supercharge it.
Yep. Well, let's talk about that, Sun, in terms of integrating AI into the crypto ecosystem. How will that improve the user experience for whether it's institutional or retail?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of this area of cross-section of AI and crypto is super rich. I think that it goes both ways. In some sense, AI is technology to help improve the user experience of blockchains. But there's also this other direction, which is that blockchains are the natural substrate for things like AI agents to interact with each other, right? To trade, communicate, but just focusing on the UX perspective, maybe. I think that because blockchains are transparent, it's free to transact, AI is going to play a significant role in, one, educating people about what is actually happening on the blockchain. How do I interact with this thing? How do I use it? But also help people actually use the technology directly. For example, we're already seeing this with DeFi protocols that are increasingly embedding AI into the investment decisions that are recommended to users. So yeah, I think it's just that there's, AI is effectively cheap intelligence. And when you combine cheap intelligence with open markets that are freely accessible and transparent, you get this very powerful combination.
We've been talking about how AI can help, DeFi or blockchain or the blockchain Web3 applications, but you can also think the other way around, how blockchain can help AI, because AI has its problem, that the authenticity that you just mentioned.
Yes.
Okay, so expand on that.
Well, I think you nailed it, because authenticity will be assured, in my opinion, today through blockchain technologies in the AI world.
Right.
How do we're going to produce content at folds more than humans have been able to. How do you track it? How do you know its provenance? Blockchain is right there and ready to do that.
And this is how, as I said, each and every one has its weaknesses and strengths.
Yes.
So the weakness, which is the authenticity of AI, blockchain can come and help and provide that authenticity.
100%. I think the combination of these two is exactly where we need to go. I'll just add to your excellent response on how AI helps. AI also will hyper-personalize DeFi, which we have not been able to do well on a large scale. So now we will be able to really deliver a user experience that is really rich, but also hyper-personalized. Wasn't possible to do without AI.
And maybe use a Gen AI, like a chatbot, because now these applications, are not user-friendly.
Yes.
I mean, it's really hard to figure out, how to maneuver, so to speak. But if you have a Gen AI chatbot, and you just talk to it, and that makes things so much easier. And I think the adoption probably will get there.
So let's switch gears for a moment here, Jason. I want to get your thoughts in terms of governance and AI regulation. It has really been a challenge to get a global framework in place, and there's fundamental differences in terms of how we legislate here and other areas of the world. So when we're trying to figure out what a data governance standardized framework looks like and how we can integrate that into, we're talking about crypto, digital asset legislation, AI legislation, data privacy legislation, how do you make that calculus work, or where are we with that?
So I think on the regulation front, it's interesting because there seems to be like tides that are shifting in the decentralization space, right? If we just look at MiCA, for example, right? It starts to provide some framework, right? And it focuses on points of centralization. But it makes an exception, right? And the exact exception is for fully decentralized services, right? And so there's an acknowledgement there, right? That at least there's something innovative, different, that they're not yet ready to acknowledge on how to address at that layer, right? In the US, we've had the FIT 21 bill, right? That came in through the House. They're similar, right? We have an exception for decentralized finance, right? And we have a framework on how, policymakers are trying to think about decentralized systems, right? And so they're putting forth criteria, whether it obviously moves forward through the Senate and all that, that's all open questions, right? But at least, it's evident that, there's at least a tide, right, where folks are understanding that there's something innovative about this decentralization that they're still trying to figure out how to work with. I think as we had mentioned, as we had talked about prior, I think if you look at blockchain, right, and you look at permissionless and transparent networks, right, there's actually specific things that blockchains can help with that maybe closed systems can't, right? And just to quickly name a few, right, regulators care about custody risk, right? Well, when you have blockchain, right, you could associate tokens with addresses in a way that there's no third party that can come in and change that association, right? Regulators care about sanctions and money laundering, right? Well, look at the transparency, right?
Right, exactly.
To the extent that you're fully decentralized, and the interoperability protocol, as an example, is fully transparent, and you can actually track, the transactions across that protocol, right? All of a sudden, you have some answers that are popping up. So I think there are other benefits as well, and I think there's what's necessary a little bit is just a little bit of a shift to kind of say, okay, it's different, it's new, it's innovative, right? Which seems like folks are starting to understand. but there's also benefits that they can gain from this that maybe they wouldn't have been able to gain from traditional intermediated, centralized financial market intermediaries.
I mean, Web3, I mean, as much as, we think that, DeFi is people want to use it in order to, for crime and avoid the regulation of that, it's just the opposite. I mean, sometimes I say, okay, I wish all criminals would use crypto and not cash. I mean, that will be easier to find them and, track what they're doing. So it's better for regulators, in fact, that we have the DeFi system and the decentralized system rather than the silos that we have today, which is harder to track, follow, and regulate even.
But the issue with regulation and the difficulty our regulators are having is that AI is not national, it's not international, it's actually a transnational technology.
Exactly.
How do you regulate transnational resources? Think climate, very hard. Secondly, we have a global system that has very different views on regulation.
Right.
The Chinese think the state knows better, the Americans think the companies know better, and the Europeans are trying to find an in-between point. The global regulatory environment is also at odds. And I think the third issue is the speed. The speed at which this is moving, and we've seen this before, from nuclear in the 50s to genetics in the 80s to the internet in the 90s. Same thing is happening again. The speed of technology makes it hard for governments to lead the regulation.
Right, and I think, because of the jurisdictional nature of it, and let's take something, Jason, as an example when it comes to legislating data privacy. I mean, privacy is a fundamental institution for the United States of America, which makes it challenging for us. Like, well, I understood, but like for the EU, think about MiFID and GDPR, right? Fundamentally, we think about privacy and speech in a very different way. Look why Section 230 is such a challenge. Right? Nothing's changed in terms of how we fundamentally look at it.
Right.
So.
This is the difficulty we're facing right now. But the good news, we have examples in the past of how governments, businesses, and civil society got together and actually created what I like to call co-governance frameworks that allowed usually the scientists who understand the technology, the experts who know how this works, to lead the design of these governance frameworks, not governments. The problem we have when governments are the starting point is that we rush towards how do we implement and how do we manage the policy and the law and we defend it, versus what is the right thing to do to make everybody work together.
And governments don't get it right either. I mean, I just look at the one that is in the works in California with the AI, the 1047, which doesn't make sense. I mean, they're putting the onus on developers. I mean, whose developer in his right mind you want to do anything in California?
Well, California law is always kind of its own.
But just think about, suppose it's good. I mean, they're going to vote for it. I mean, then the triple effect. The ripple effect that it's going to be. It's going to be significant
for California.
For the U.S. For just think about it. I mean, it's just like they just don't get it. I mean, in my mind. I mean,
but I think we have to communicate it in a very different. We only have 1 more minute to go, so I'm going to take up 15 seconds of that.
Sure.
You have to. From a technical perspective, it's almost like when you are talking to your board. You have to break it down into more of a corporate finance language when you're trying to explain cybersecurity needs, as an example, right? So if you're talking to a politician, you want to get support when it comes to digital assets. This is going to bring jobs to your jurisdiction. You are going to get more government funding for these utilities. So I think you have to put it, Fadi, Sunand, I'd like to get your thoughts on that. You have to be able to speak their language so it makes sense.
Yeah, I think that it is really essential for government to be on top of this, because it's a serious national security issue.
Right.
What we were talking, I think nukes, like nuclear weapons, are the best analogy, even more so than the internet, because AI, when you take it to the limit, is one of the most powerful weapons conceivable. So I think maybe framing things, I don't think people get that. I don't think government gets it, that and potentially framing things from this perspective of national security is a way to get people serious and get people focused, because ultimately it's true, developers can't regulate this, right? You need nation-state level security to guard these kind of systems.
All right,
but they need to understand.
We got to wrap. Thank you everyone for your insight. Thanks for joining us on TradeTalks, and thanks for joining me from MarketSite. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.